Hello there, everyone. If you're watching this video, then you are part of the TTOR army, an army that is building itself up one subscriber at a time. Now, before we get into the topic of today's video, you've probably noticed that my little banner here on the screen has changed. No longer do you see my social media handles on there. Since I'm on so many different video sharing sites, I decided that my banner from now on is going to have all of my video sites, or at least most of them, showing up down there. So as you can see, not only am I on YouTube, but I'm also on BitChute, where I have over 2,300 subscribers. I'm on Rumble. I'm on Joshu TV, which is a YouTube alternative that my friend Seeking the Truth runs. And I'm on Quarter, which is an open source alt tech alternative to YouTube that I founded and I run. And of course, I put my videos there, and I embed all of them on the TTOR website. So those are all the places you can find TTOR videos on. There's also a YouTube channel that I have, but I didn't have enough room on the banner to put it in there, so you can find the link to my YouTube channel, as well as all this stuff, in the description box below. With that being said, today we're going to be talking about how the Law of Entropy, also known as the Second Law of Thermodynamics, proves that evolution is false, that it cannot happen. The Law of Entropy disproves evolution. Now, I actually made a video about this back in 2019 on my BitChute channel, but this was back in the days before I knew how to use OBS, or before I even used OBS to record and produce my videos. So I decided not only are we going to remake that video using my updated technology and with my pro knowledge of OBS, but we're going to add new content towards the end that was not in the original video that I put out in 2019. But anyways, you're probably wondering, how the heck does the law of entropy disprove evolution? Some of you might even be wondering, what is the law of entropy? Well, the law of entropy, which is also known as the second law of thermodynamics, is defined in a particular way. Here on screen, you can see the Wikipedia article for the second law of thermodynamics, which the law of entropy is another name for the second law of thermodynamics. This is what Wikipedia says. We'll read the first two paragraphs. The second law of thermodynamics is a physical law based on universal experience concerning heat and energy interconversions. One simple statement of the law is that heat always moves from hotter objects to colder objects, or downhill, unless energy in some form is supplied to reverse the direction of heat flow. Another definition is, not all heat energy can be converted into work in a cyclic process. The second law of thermodynamics in other versions establishes the concept of entropy as a physical property of a thermodynamic system. It can be used to predict whether processes are forbidden despite obeying the requirement of conservation of energy as expressed in the first law of thermodynamics, and provides necessary criteria for spontaneous processes. The second law may be formulated by the observation that the entropy of isolated systems left to spontaneous evolution cannot decrease, as they always arrive at a state of thermodynamic equilibrium where the entropy is highest at the given interval energy. An increase in the combined entropy of system and surroundings accounts for the irreversibility of natural processes, often referred to in the concept of the arrow of time. Now, let me translate that into English for you. The law of entropy, also known as the second law of thermodynamics, states that entropy always increases over time, especially when there's no intelligent intervention involved whatsoever in the process. Entropy can never decrease, it must always increase. Well, you may be wondering to yourself at this point, okay, that's simple enough, but what is entropy? The Wikipedia article on entropy says that entropy is a scientific concept as well as a measurable physical property that is most commonly associated with a state of disorder, randomness, or uncertainty. So according to Wikipedia, entropy equals disorder. Now, I know that there are plenty of atheists and evolutionists on the internet who will criticize a young Earth creationist like me, for using Wikipedia to define the term entropy. So let's turn to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. And the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines entropy in number 1, in relation to thermodynamics, a measure of the unavailable energy in a closed thermodynamic system that is also usually considered to be a measure of the system's disorder. That is a property of the system's state, and that varies directly with any reversible change in heat in the system and inversely with the temperature of the system. Or more broadly, the degree of disorder or uncertainty in a system. So once again, entropy is equated to disorder. Definition 2a says that the degradation of the matter and energy in the universe to an ultimate state of inert uniformity. That's another definition of entropy. Or, as the quotation below it says, entropy is the general trend of the universe toward death and disorder. James R. Newman. Or definition B, a process of degradation or running down or a trend to disorder. In other words, the law of entropy teaches that when the universe itself and everything in it is left to its own devices over time, everything naturally wears down, breaks down, degrades, falls into disorder. What's funny about this is that the Bible itself actually teaches the law of entropy. When you turn to Psalm 102, verses 25 through 27, you read the following. In the beginning you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like clothing, you will change them, and they will be discarded, but you remain the same, and your years will never end. So according to the Bible, according to Psalm 102, 25 through 27, the universe and the earth are wearing out like a garment, and God will eventually discard them. This is literally the law of entropy being taught in the Bible. In other words, the same Bible that teaches that the universe and earth are a little over 6,000 years old also teaches and affirms the law of entropy. And of course, the law of entropy wasn't discovered and formulated as a scientific law until long after Psalm 102, 25 through 27 was written. So the scientific community has confirmed and affirmed that the Bible is correct when it says that the universe and earth are wearing out, falling into disorder. Now, at this point, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, it's cool that the Bible talked about the law of entropy long before it was formulated, but what does this have to do with evolution and disproving evolution? Well, I'm glad you asked. I have here on screen this lovely chart that I created back in 2019 that I'm going to reuse. As you can see on this graph, we have a pretty basic line graph. The vertical bar is information, so the further up that bar you go, the more information you have. The horizontal bar equals time, so the further along that bar you go, the further along in time you go. The blue line that you see on the graph represents the evolution paradigm of history. The red line that you see on the graph represents the law of entropy. So according to evolution, as we can see from the blue line, the universe itself and everything in it, when left to its own devices with no intelligent intervention whatsoever, will naturally increase in information over time, over billions of years. Or, as we understand it, things go from simple to more complex over billions of years, over time. Well, in order for things to go from simple to more complex over billions of years, that requires an increase in information. And it doesn't matter which definition of evolution that you're talking about here, the concept is the same. In order for things to go from simple to more complex over time, you have to have an increase in information over time. Or, as the blue line shows, over time, information increases. But the law of entropy teaches the opposite. The law of entropy teaches that when the universe itself and everything that is in it is left to its own devices without any intelligent intervention whatsoever, everything wears down, breaks down, and falls into disorder. In other words, information decreases over time, as we can see by the red line. So when you graph it out, like I did, you discover that evolution literally contradicts the law of entropy, which is the most established law in all of science. Some scientists have said that the law of entropy is so well established that it will never be overthrown by the advances of science over time. So, since the law of entropy completely contradicts evolution, is there any hope for evolution being true? Well, let's turn to historical figures to find out. Here I have a book by Sir Arthur Eddington titled The Nature of the Physical World. So, when you go to page 37 of The Nature of the Physical World, you see Sir Arthur Eddington say the following. The practical measure of the random element which can increase in the universe but can never decrease is called entropy. Measuring by entropy is the same as measuring by the chance explained in the last paragraph, only the unimaginably large numbers are transformed by a simple formula into a more convenient scale of reckoning. Entropy continually increases. We can, by isolating parts of the world and postulating rather idealized conditions in our problems, arrest the increase, but we cannot turn it into a decrease. That would involve something much worse than a violation of an ordinary law of nature, namely an improbable coincidence. The law that entropy always increases, the second law of thermodynamics, holds, I think, the supreme position among the laws of nature. If someone points out to you that your pet theory of the universe is in disagreement with Maxwell's equations, then so much for Maxwell's equations. If it is found to be contradicted by observations, well, these experimentalists do bungle things sometimes. But if your theory is found to be against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you no hope. There is nothing for it but to collapse in deepest humiliation. So, as we can see in what we read, Sir Arthur Eddington said that if your scientific theory contradicts the law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, then there is zero chance that your theory is true, and it will collapse in deep humiliation, and it must be discarded. As we saw earlier in the video, evolution as a concept completely and utterly contradicts and violates the law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. So there is no way that evolution can be true. And so if we take Sir Arthur Eddington's advice, we must discard evolution as a scientific theory. It cannot possibly be true because it literally contradicts the law of entropy in the most fundamental way possible. And according to Sir Arthur Eddington, if something contradicts the law of entropy, it can't possibly be true. So therefore, evolution is not true, and we can discard the entire thing. Now, I already know how evolutionists and atheists are going to respond. They're going to say, well, yeah, sure, the law of entropy as you've described it works in the way you've described it in closed systems, but the Earth is not a closed system. The Earth is an open system that receives energy from the sun. Therefore, the energy of the sun overrides the law of entropy and allows evolution to occur. Well, creationists have been dealing with this objection for a long time now, several decades, and there's already a good response to that. I have here on screen, as you can see, a YouTube video on the Northwest Creation Network called Thermodynamic Arguments for Creation. This is a 2004 presentation by the young Earth creationist Dr. Thomas Kindle called Thermodynamic Arguments for Creation. It was uploaded to the Northwest Creation Network in 2013, but the actual presentation itself was given at the Seattle Creation Conference in July of 2004. And in response to the particular objection to the law of entropy argument that atheists will give, Dr. Thomas Kindle answers that objection.
Now, of course, they do have an answer to the problem of the second law of thermodynamics. How do we get all this great increase in order? Well, it's because the Earth is an open system. You see, the second law they claim is defined in the terms of an isolated system without any energy or matter entering it. And in such an isolated system, yes, the entropy must also always increase. The disorganization must always increase over time. But it so happens that the Earth is an exception because it is open to the energy from the sun, and this influx of solar energy is more than sufficient to overcome the degenerative effect of the second law and allow enormous complexity to build up over billions of years. Sounds like a good story, but it doesn't really work. There we go. It actually worked. Now, I quote here the Harvard scientist, or at least he was a scientist at Harvard when he wrote this for Chemical and Engineering News back in the 80s. He said, ordinarily, the second law is stated for isolated systems, but the second law applies equally well to open systems. Now, think about that. Is that true? Obviously, it's true. Obviously, where did we test and prove the physical law known as the Second Law of Thermodynamics? Did we test it here on Earth? Well, then how did we prove it? After all, it doesn't apply on Earth. Earth is an open system. Obviously, just because energy is available doesn't negate the function of the second law. We test it here. We prove it here. Obviously, things rot, rust, and corrode and corrupt, and everything is going downhill in spite of the fact that we live in an open system. This a child could understand. It doesn't matter if the system is open. The question is, what is it open to? And if it's only open to raw energy, you're still going to get degeneration over time.
So, as we could see in that clip, which ran from the 44-minute, 42-second mark to the 46-minute, 36-second mark of this video, Dr. Thomas Kendall explains that the atheist objection here about the Earth being an open system and the energy of the sun overriding the law of entropy so that evolution can occur, it just does not work at all. Why? Because the experiments that were done to verify the law of entropy were performed on Earth, which is an open system. So obviously, the law of entropy works on open systems as well as closed ones, which is why he quoted that John Ross guy towards the beginning of the clip that we were watching. But even if we were to go along with the atheist or the evolutionist and assume that the law of entropy only works on closed systems and not on open systems, well, we would have to conclude that the universe itself is a closed system, which is why the law of entropy works everywhere we look. Now, what's funny about Dr. Thomas Kendall answering the objection that atheists give regarding the whole open versus closed system arguments in relation to the law of entropy, he answered that objection back in 2004 in this presentation he was giving. And in the 19 years that have passed since he made this presentation, to my knowledge, no atheist or evolutionist has ever answered back to what he said and disproved him regarding why evolution obviously works on open systems as well as closed ones. No atheist and evolutionist has ever disproved what he said. And yet they run around acting like, oh, yeah, obviously the law of entropy doesn't work on open systems. No creationist has ever answered this objection of ours. This argument they make regarding the law of entropy only working on closed systems and not on open ones has literally been debunked for a couple of decades, and yet they run around acting like it's never been debunked. They keep making the same tired, debunked argument regarding the law of entropy not working on open systems, and thus allowing evolution to occur on Earth. Well, folks, that's all I got to say in this video. As we can see, the theory of evolution cannot possibly be true because it literally contradicts the law of entropy, which is the most fundamental law in all of science that will never be overturned by the advances of science. And because evolution contradicts it, it can't possibly be true. And so we can throw the whole thing out. And young Earth creationism becomes a much more viable explanation for the origins of the Earth and universe than evolution can ever be. Because the young Earth creationism worldview that's outlined by the Bible does not violate the law of entropy, especially since the Bible itself, as we saw earlier in the video, literally affirms the law of entropy.